Hello. In this video, I'm going to take you through the process of restringing my acoustic guitar. I own quite a few guitars. I've been playing for decades now. And this one is a Martin Dreadnought Jr. And it's quite an interesting guitar. It's interesting because Martin generally sell quite expensive guitars, but this one is, for a Martin, really rather affordable. So why is it so affordable? Well, firstly, the clue is in the name. This is a Dreadnought Jr., which means it's a much smaller guitar and therefore uses fewer materials and slightly cheaper materials, although they are still very, very well constructed, and the wood is excellent. About the wood, the top of the guitar is a solid spruce top, and the body is I forget the name of the wood, it's a mahogany-like wood, sapele. It's called sapele, which is very similar to mahogany. It's a slightly denser wood, and as a result, the tone of the wood, or the tone that you produce if you were to use that wood, is slightly brighter than you would have if you were to use mahogany. So here you can see I'm just removing the strings. Now we all restring our guitars differently. There's no set way of doing it. I am relatively neat, I suppose. I've seen some very sloppy methods over the years. Typically, if you don't know, typically you would remove the higher strings first from the guitar, because if you think about it, if you were to leave the thicker strings, the lower strings on, they're far more capable of holding that tension than the thinner, higher strings. If you start taking the thick, low strings off, you've then got an awful lot of tension as you take that very last high E string off, and it could well snap. It's unlikely, but it's not good to put all that tension on one very thin string. Alternatively, you can loosen all of the strings roughly the same time, slowly ease the tension off. I believe that's actually what I did here. As I say, there's really no definitive way of removing and replacing guitar strings, and we do all do it differently. So what I'm doing here now is just showing the bridge pegs which hold the strings into the guitar. Those little white things were that I was holding up to the camera. There we go, there's another one. And those are made of plastic, but they can be made of wood. It's not uncommon to see those made of ebony, which is a very strong wood, very nice looking wood. And now I'm just taking these, the final peg there, I believe. Now you can see there's the last peg. needs to be removed. It can be quite difficult removing these. Actually, they can be really jammed in there. There's no locking mechanism. You don't screw them in, you just push them in and the tension holds it there for you quite nicely. And there, actually, if you look inside the sound hole there, you can see that says Martin Dreadnought Jr. And there's the strings. Now, these strings weren't particularly old. They were a little dirty, actually. I was quite surprised by how dirty they were, considering their age. But I just didn't like the tone of them. I don't know what strings they were. I might have bought a cheap pair and a cheap set, and they just sounded awful. So I put up with it for a few months, and then decided enough was enough, and I removed them. And I thought you might appreciate watching the process of removing them and replacing them, which can be really quite a meditative experience, actually. It's very easy to zone out doing this. Very easy. You can just switch your brain off and engage with the task at hand, and that's what's really quite satisfying about it, is that it is a task. It is a simple, straightforward task. At the beginning, something is wrong, and by the end of it, something is right. And there's a lot to be said for that sort of work, I think. It's just good, honest work. And it can be very pleasing. Not always. Sometimes this is an absolute chore. Sometimes if you're not in the mood for restringing your guitar, but it needs to be restrung, that can be really very tedious. But I was looking forward to this, actually, and I did enjoy it immensely. So what I'm doing here is using the tiniest drop of water. In fact, I probably used a little too much water for this first run of it, just to wipe off any of the dirt that's built up on the fretboard. Again, a little surprised by the amount of dirt that I'm taking off here. I don't quite know how that happened. Perhaps I haven't cleaned the fretboard for a while and I've just been replacing the strings. But you should never really use anything more than water, and if you like, you can put a drop of detergent in there. Something like Fairy Liquid is absolutely fine, but only a drop. And what that will do is it will lift the dirt and the grease, specifically the grease that I'm thinking of, because it's very difficult to get grease off if you're not using a soap of some kind. It needs to be emulsified. So to get the grease off, if there's a lot of it, you will need to use some sort of soap. But what that will do is dry out the fretboard. Now, what I didn't realise here, as I was working away and getting terribly worried about drying the fretboard out because I'd used a little bit too much water, what I hadn't realised was that this was not a wooden fretboard. Strictly speaking, it is a material known as Richlight, which again makes this quite an interesting guitar. Richlight is not wood. It is a wood replacement, I suppose. It's a resin mixed with water. A resin mixed with paper. And so, essentially, what that means is this is more plastic than it is wood, which may sound odd that a company like Martin, and if you don't know, they are quite a respected producer of acoustic guitars, certainly very well known. If you're aware of acoustic guitars, you'll be aware of Martin. It may seem odd that they're using plastic on a fretboard rather than wood, but actually it turns out that in many of their double-blind tests, professional players could not tell the difference between the Richlight fretboard and the ebony fretboard. Typically, darker fretboards like this you would use ebony in the past, but now more and more companies, including Martin and Gibson, are using. Gibson is another quite well-known maker of guitars. They're now increasingly using Richlight because players simply can't tell the difference. I certainly can't. I can't tell the difference. But it's, first of all, much cheaper to produce, and secondly, and most importantly, well, for me at least, and hopefully for a lot of other people, it is far more environmentally friendly. Far fewer ebony trees being cut down, which is good for the environment. And if you can't tell the difference anyway, then there's really no need to be chopping down trees if we can use a different kind of material that is more responsible, ecologically speaking. Now, obviously, plastics have their own problems, their own environmental problems, and paper is used in this material as well. So there are still issues there, but it lessens the impact, certainly lessens the impact. Now, this is my first mistake here. So I believe this guitar had an ebony fretboard, because lots of my guitars do, and I assumed Martin would be using an ebony fretboard because they're quite a traditional producer of acoustic guitars. So that is why, after having used water, I was worried about drying out the fretboard, and so I'm now applying some lemon oil to the fretboard. However, because this is Richlight, that lemon oil that I'm now quite vigorously applying is doing absolutely nothing. That lemon oil Richlight is not porous, so it will not soak up that lemon oil. It will not condition the fretboard, and that's fine. I mean, it makes me a little bit stupid, but it's fine that it doesn't condition the fretboard, because the fretboard doesn't need conditioning at this stage. You can kitchen countertops are made out of Richlight. You can wipe them down with pretty much anything, and you're not going to ruin it in any way. It takes a lot to ruin a Richlight surface. So this process here is completely pointless. It is a waste of my time. Nonetheless, it's still quite meditative, and at the time I believed I was doing something good. So, at least I got some enjoyment out of it in the moment. But if you do clean your guitar, and you do have a wooden fretboard, and you have used water or very slightly soapy water, I would really recommend buying some lemon oil. It doesn't cost very much, and it will condition the fretboard, and it will leave it in a much better state than if you were to simply wipe it down and allow it to dry out. This here is just some guitar polish. Shouldn't use it on the wood. It's not that kind of polish, but it's good. It's good on the plastic parts of the guitar. So this would have actually been quite good on the fretboard, or it certainly wouldn't have done any harm. But I'm using it on the scratch plate there, just to buff it up and give it little bit of a sheen. I think you can already see the sheen there coming up quite nicely. Again, this isn't going to change the sound of the guitar in any way, but it's nice to look after nice things, and this is a nice guitar, and while it's one of their cheaper ones, it's still not cheap. It's just comparatively cheap. And I do like to look after instruments and take care of them. They're to be played as much as they're looked after. There's something very sad, I think, about an instrument that's left to gather dust. They should be played to within an inch of their life, but they should also be taken care of just as much as they're played. So here again, the bridge is typically ebony, and that would also require conditioning with the lemon oil. However, that is not an ebony bridge, so this again is another entirely pointless task. So I'm engaging in here. This is doing absolutely nothing, and it won't even bring it out in a shine, really. But as I say, it's not done any harm to the guitar. Now these are the new strings I'm putting on there, Martin strings. You don't need Martin strings for a Martin guitar, you can use any strings. But I read some reviews online and these seem to be pretty good. And actually, I don't know what I'm saying. I've used these before, I know they're good. I've just not used them in a while. And that's how they come packaged, wound up like that. And the process here is really very simple. You stick it in the hole, you pop in the peg, like so, give it a bit of a tug to make sure it's in there, then you pull it up along the fretboard, and here is where really everyone differs. I will typically wrap the string around the tuning peg up there around 2 times after I've threaded it through. So I will thread the string through, then, no, I tell a lie, I'll wrap it round 2 times and then I'll thread the string through. And this makes for a really very neat coil at the top. It can be a bit of a pain getting this through the first time, and it's very easy to prick your finger or palm of your hand. And I'm not afraid to be quite rough with the guitar at this point. They can take a lot. Just imagine the amount of tension that is placed on that neck. They can take a tug here, a tug there. If you're doing it in the interests of making a neat coil at the top, then give it a tug. It'll be fine. Just don't overdo it. And so that's what I'm doing there. I'm trying to make sure that the string wraps around evenly and in such a fashion that there aren't coils and coils of string left over. So you can see there just about, I've done a relatively good job. This is always the hardest one because it's the thickest string and it's hard to manipulate. And it hurts the hands. You get used to it. And that's that. That's the first string on. And this is what I was talking about earlier. You really should prioritize the 6th string, which is the lowest string and the thickest string when adding the new strings, because that's taking all that tension on that one string. If you to do it with the thinnest string, you're asking a lot of that string. You're asking it to do an awful lot of holding there, which is a little unfair, and could damage the string, could snap the string. Unlikely, but could do. Why not just do it the other way? there you go, there's the double wrap, as I was explaining before, quite nicely done actually. And then I'll just thread it through at the top. I thread it above the coil there, so that can be nice and tight. I'll tug that, and then as you tighten it there, with the tuning peg itself, it will actually tighten the coil on its own. So you only really need to get it in position, and then as you tune it, it will slip into place very neatly, very nicely. And you see these bits of excess string here flopping about. These I will cut back at the end after every string has been threaded, and after I've tuned it and retuned it, because that's another thing. When you put on a fresh set of strings on a guitar, they're still very elastic, so they will lose their tuning almost instantly. You will tune it up perfectly, play a few chords, pick a few strings, bend a few notes, and then straight away those notes will be out of tune, because the strings need to set in. They still need to lose that elasticity that they have. So after I've done all that, after I've played the guitar quite hard and tuned it several times, I will then cut the strings off at the end. And the reason for that is the strings may slip, and I may have to rethread it, and you can't do that if you've cut the string off at the end. Or you can, but my goodness, it's very difficult. So they may slip. I may have done a bad job and not realised. I may need to restring it on one string, and again, very difficult to do when you've only got when you don't have much slack to play with. So it's always better to be safe than sorry. There you go, those are the first 3 strings on there. E, A and D. And these are, I have since installed these strings and played with them. I'm recording this after I've strung the guitar. These are really nice strings, I have to say. If you're thinking about buying some new acoustic guitar strings, do go for these Martin Retros. They just, I don't know why they sound so good, but they are very bright. I like a bright sound. Typically you don't get an exceptionally bright sound with a Martin guitar, largely because they're just the shape, they're so big, and they will use these denser woods. But these just sound lovely. It sounds like a new guitar in many ways. It's extraordinary, really, the difference strings can make. Same when you consider the difference different types of wood can make. You wouldn't think that it would be something that you could detect, but you really can. So this isn't a nice guitar to have because it's a Martin, but it's got an unusually bright tone for a Martin. I have a number of other acoustic guitars. I have another Martin. I also have an Ovation, which are, I suppose I should show that one day as well, because they're quite funny looking guitars. Unusual construction as well. The Ovation I have has a plastic body, and it's bulbous, it's convex, but it's an awkward one to actually hold and play sitting down, because you have this bowl-like design at the back. It means it can slip and slide around the place. That certainly has its own sound. And I forgot to mention, this is an electroacoustic as well. So this is a Martin Dreadnought Junior E, and of course the E stands for electric. So you can plug this in if you like, but I've never enjoyed the sound of electroacoustic guitars. When they're plugged in, the sound is just sort of noise to me. I have to say, I don't enjoy it. It's never as good as a mic'd up acoustic guitar. So I can't say I ever plug this in, because the sound is just horrible to me. It's quite, I find that electroacoustics, it's sort of a waste of the acoustics. I don't know why you would, well, I do know why. It's useful for gigging and that sort of thing, but no, I've never enjoyed the sound. It's always been a compromise. And the reason you buy, and the appeal to me of the acoustic guitar, is because it can do everything that the electric can't, which is, okay, so I have electric guitars as well, and with an electric guitar, if you want to modify your sound, if you want it to be louder or crunchier, what you do is you turn the volume up on the amplifier. You can hit it harder, but that's not really going to do it. You need to put it's going to be limited by whatever volume you're playing at. The acoustic guitar is so wonderful, and I enjoy playing it so much, because if you want it to be louder, you hit it harder. The sound doesn't come from an amplifier. The sound, in a funny way, comes from your muscles. It comes from it, but the sound begins in the muscles in your arm, and then that muscle strikes your hand strikes the strings, and the strings make a noise. And if you want that to be gentler, then you must be gentler with your instrument. And if you want it to be louder and harsher, then, my goodness, you have to be harsh with your instrument. You have to really go for it. And so you end up, oh, this is going to sound absolutely bonkers, but you end up having a sort of a relationship with your instrument that you just don't build up in the same way as you do with an electric guitar. Now I realise that sounds mad. Anyway, I've come to the end now, and that's Restrung, and perhaps if you'd like to hear me play, I can do another video and show you how this guitar sounds. Thank you very much for listening.